help is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have Manuelita Brown, my aunt Manuelita Brown, who is a prominent sculptor, does a lot of great African-American, especially work, lives in San Diego. But my aunt Manuelita is a graduate, a 1958 graduate of Luther Jackson High School. And we're going to talk a little bit about the integration of Fairfax County schools. Thanks for joining me, Aunt Manuelita.
My pleasure, Julian.
Yeah. Well, let me get your background because it's fascinating. You were, we're going to talk about more your early days, but I know you were among the first classes to go to Luther Jackson, which was the first high school in Fairfax County. As I said before, you're a class of 58. You end up going to Virginia State University, but you end up graduating from Oregon State University with a degree in math, a BS. Oregon State. You were you got a master's in psychology, I believe, as well, and you became a sculptor probably in the last 20 or 30 years, and you've attracted quite a following for your work. I believe you have a work of Sojourner Truth that won an award. But anyways, did I get the broad sketches of your career correct?
Yes.
Yeah. One thing I forgot is, you have two sons, and one of your son is a professor at Harvard, and he's done some work that Vincent Brown, a lot of us have seen at PBS. But to give a little background about this, in 1954, the Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education, a very famous case, and that led to the integration of our public schools, and it reversed Plessy versus Ferguson that allowed separate but equal schools. And but what a lot of folks don't know is Fairfax County, where I was born, and I still live 2 or 3 miles from the Fairfax County border, a DC suburb, known as a progressive county. But that was the exact year that an all-black high school was built, that was opened. And before that year, 1954, Black students like yourself had to travel to go to secondary school, to go to high school, and I believe middle school as well. They had to go to Manassas, which sometimes is called Jenny Dean, also called Manassas Regional High School. Some kids went to DC. They went to school in Dunbar, Phelps, Armstrong, and I believe there were some schools that went to Hoffman, Boston, and Arlington, and also Parker Gray and Alexandria. So it's fascinating at this 1954, this very important date. That was the year that Luther Jackson High School in Falls Church opened. Did I get that correct, Aunt Manuelita?
Yes, that's correct. And the year before that, in the 8th grade, I went to Manassas Regional.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get back to how you came to Virginia. I believe you were born in Maryland. When did you guys first?
I was born in Virginia in my grandfather's home in Warm Springs, Virginia.
Wow. And Warm Springs is not too far. That's where FDR would go to relax, I believe. That's near Covington. That's near Covington, Virginia. Is that correct?
Hot Springs, Virginia had a rather well-known resort called the Homestead.
Still there.
And in fact, it may still exist. It's been there quite a long time. And in fact, my father worked there when he was a teenager.
Okay. So, and I believe that's where also Sam Snead, the famous golfer, had a golf course and was a longtime pro there. So how did you guys get to the DC area and eventually Northern Virginia?
My father was a cab driver, and he worked in Washington, D.C. At part of the time. Sometimes he was a private chauffeur and worked, but I considered being a taxi driver being a public chauffeur. And we moved to Northern Virginia and DC during that time. So there's actually a photograph of me with my father as an infant, and we're walking down the street in DC.
Yeah. So there wasn't that many Black neighborhoods in Northern Virginia. There was Halls Hill, Arlington. There was a Valley in Alexandria. There was a Zion Drive neighborhood, in Braddock Road near Fairfax, Burke. Why did you guys decide to come to Northern Virginia?
Well, probably because it was an area where there were less expensive homes. And my father, we rented a house. We didn't own a home. We rented a house in a very small neighborhood. There were mostly relatives. The Carter family had a number of homes in this 2 or 3 streets in Vienna. And so we rented one of those homes from one of the ladies who was not married, but she had a home there. And we were there for quite a while until my father passed. And when he died, my mother moved herself and her 3 daughters to DC again.
Mm-hmm. But by then you had already graduated. Is that correct?
No, I was 16 when he died. So I actually graduated from Luther Jackson because I was transporting myself from DC back into Virginia to finish high school.
Okay. Yeah. So what neighborhood was that in Vienna? Was there a name for the neighborhood, or was just street?
No, there was Old Courthouse Road and Nutley.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody that I knew in that 2 streets were all members of the same family. So my guess is the family had owned a lot of land there and then divided it up among the siblings, and they each built a house.
Right. So do you have fond memories of those days? It's probably pretty rural at the time. I mean, it wasn't built up like Fairfax County is today. So what are your memories of the old Courthouse Road area?
My memory, one of the best memories I have is riding my bicycle, and you could ride down Maple Street and the trees actually touched over the top of the street. It looked like you were riding through an archway. Now I think Maple Street is practically a thoroughfare. And there was a Girl Scout troop. All of this was segregated. I went to Louise Archer Elementary School, which is on, I guess that's Nutley Road it's on. So that general neighborhood around Louise Archer was all Black as well. But across the street from the house I lived in was a white family. So it wasn't as strictly separated as some neighborhoods are.
Yeah. Did you play with the white kids in the neighborhood? Were you friends with the white kids?
My sister was friends with the girl across the street because my sister liked riding horses and they had horses. But I didn't know them. I was pretty much a bookworm. So I spent most of my time reading. And when I wasn't reading, I was learning crafts of some kind. I learned to knit, to crochet, to sew. And between reading, riding my bike, I did join the Girl Scouts in order to do some things there and learn some new things. But generally, I wasn't that much, but was that outgoing in terms of meeting a lot of other people.
Well, we look back on that time as being a time of a lot of tension. But, probably for a schoolgirl growing up in Vienna, it probably didn't seem like that to you. You probably didn't know any better. And this is the way life always was. And it seemed like a tense time racially to you at the time.
No, I think my parents were pretty protective. They made sure we had lots of contact with other young people. My parents were friends with some of the school teachers and belonged to a church. So there was a full social life, and the dentist and the optician and the all Black people that we went to, actually some were in DC. So that general area was considered one major large metropolitan area. So we had services that were conducted in DC as well as in Virginia.
So you mentioned you went to Louise Archer school, elementary school. So that probably went through 6th grade?
Yes, it went through 7th grade.
7th grade. So when 7th grade was over, Did you know you were going to go to school in Manassas?
Yes, that because there was no school for Black children in Fairfax who were leaving after the elementary school after seventh grade. So we had to walk to the bus stop and ride a bus to Manassas to go to school every day.
So no, I've heard that they had dorms there, and some of the kids would stay there all week. But you're saying that you took the bus back and forth every single day?
Yes, yes. The people in a lot of the areas that were near Vienna, I'm trying to think of some of the names of some of the other little areas, but between Vienna and DC, almost all of those Black children were bused to Manassas. There were children in some other counties where there was no school, but it was too far to bus, and they were housed on campus.
Mm-hmm. Did you know any kids that went to other schools, like decided, well, we're going to go to DC or we're going to go to Arlington, or maybe even maybe some wealthy kids maybe chose to go to private school? Did you know kids that took other options besides going to Manassas?
No, I didn't actually. I'm not sure that I'm certainly there probably were some, but I guess I would be considered lower middle class at that point. You know, you're renting a house, your father is a taxi driver, your mother, after he was not driving the cab anymore, was a clerk in the Pentagon, you know, working in the government. So we were not considered the wealthy people in the neighborhood. I'm sure that there were other students who had more advantages and more knowledge of what options there could be than I did. But going to Manassas, the teachers we had were really quite good. I can remember actually when I got to Oregon and realized that the students I met there, which was, you know, almost all white students, couldn't write as well as I could write when I was in elementary school. And I thought, well, this, you know, what is this problem? Why can't these students write a theme? Why can't they write a paper and not have it so bleeding red from marks from the teacher? But I remember in elementary school at Louise Archer, we had to write impromptu essays, 1 page long, and I was probably in the 5th and 6th grade, and I didn't understand why other students didn't have those kinds of experiences, but they didn't have the teachers that I had. That was the only difference.
Well, these great teachers that you talk about from Louise Archer and then in Manassas, did you guys call it Jenny Dean or Manassas Regional?
We called it Manassas Regional. I did not hear about Jenny Dean until just a few years ago.
Okay, yeah, I've seen it called both things. And then Luther Jackson, where did these teachers come from that were so talented and so driven?
Well, some of them were educated in Black colleges and universities, but some of them were educated in the North in integrated colleges. Mm-hmm. I can remember a math teacher who was also a minister. He actually was teaching at Manassas and then was teaching at Luther Jackson as well. And I think because of Reverend Samuel, I was probably decided to be a math major when I went to Virginia State. But I also had excellent teachers. I would actually say professors in history and chemistry, in physics. We actually had a physics class, Mr. Gaskins, who was really quite good. Unfortunately, I don't know much about their backgrounds, but I know that they were caring and competent teachers. And I wish all students had such teachers.
Well, in your classmates, I'm sure a lot of your classmates were from very humble families. The average African-American family, you called yourself a mid to mid-level income. was probably lower than even your family was. Did they appreciate, or did they get a chance to really take advantage of the great teachers that you guys had?
Well, you run the spectrum. It was like in any group of people, you have those who know that they're getting a good deal, and people who are really not taking advantage of it at all. I don't remember there being an epidemic of dropouts, but I'm sure there had to have been dropouts. But I confess that between my book reading rather consistently, and the fact that, well, you can say, when I graduated from Luther Jackson, I was valedictorian. So that meant I spent a lot of my time dealing with my grades, and although I wasn't very grade oriented, I always wanted to excel. And so I paid much less attention probably than many people might have to what was going on around me.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that, the long bus ride to Manassas every day. Were there some kids that decided not to continue their education after seventh grade and just, went to work and found jobs? Or did most kids go to Manassas to go to school?
No, there were a few that I didn't see anymore once we were going to Manassas. And unfortunately, I think some of the young women, so at that point, they're young teenagers, were probably already dating and thinking about getting married and that sort of thing. But it wasn't that way among the few people that I was interacting with.
How long a bus ride was it to get to Manassas every day?
Long enough to take a nap. It seemed to be, I'm trying to remember, in the winter, it would be pretty much dark when we walked to the bus stop, and dark when we got home. Yeah. So it probably was at least an hour to an hour and a half each way.
Wow. Well, and if you had kids coming from all over the county, they must have had lots of buses, because there are lots of different pockets with which they can draw students. So you must have had buses coming from all over Fairfax County.
Oh yeah. There were buses. The bus I rode essentially came down. I don't know what that route would be called now, but you're living in the area still. What's the area that's out near Seven Corners?
Seven Corners. So that's Route 50, and it was called Lee Jackson Highway. And then there was Lee Highway that's now called Langston Highway. That probably went towards Manassas.
Yeah. And what were some of the little communities out there?
Oh yeah. Yeah. There was a Bailey Crossroads community. That's African American community.
Right.
Yes.
There were some Bailey's Crossroads. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So when you got to Manassas and you went to school, you had kids from all over. Was that invigorating to have, students from all over Northern Virginia, and Northern meaning probably, counties west of Manassas as well. Was it a vibrant student community having kids from all over? And did you enjoy that interaction?
Well, I would certainly call it a vibrant community. Where the students were from was not something that we paid much attention to. They were all students there. There were students who were athletes, students who were like I was, more academically oriented. There was a library that had everything we needed there, including on the walls artwork from many of the students. It was everything you would have wanted. I mean, there was a theater and drama class. There were singing groups. There was the science clubs. So it definitely was a full high school experience.
When you look back now, doesn't it seem strange to you or ironic that it was Manassas and Prince William that had the high school in Fairfax County, which we consider progressive today, that didn't have a high school? Did you ever think that seemed a little bit strange?
Um, I would say that at that point, my expectation of what government would do was very low.
Yeah.
When you think about the fact that there was no school, fortunately for me, the elementary school that I went to was in walking distance. I mean, it wasn't a short walk, but it wasn't an overbearing walk either. And walking to the bus stop was actually shorter than going to the school, but to the elementary school. So I wasn't in the situation where I was taken out of my community in order to go to school. That was fortunate for me. It wasn't that way for everybody. And they were reasonably good schools. I think that's probably the best thing you could say about Fairfax County at that point. The school, the elementary school that we had was an excellent school. It wasn't a subpar school. When I went to Luther Jackson, we were studying Shakespeare. There were French classes and Spanish classes. It was the progressive nature of it was they made an attempt, it seemed, to actually have separate but equal. Yeah. And so that's the only way I could call it progressive.
That's right.
Of course, it was interesting that when Luther Jackson was built, it was built in a white neighborhood. And we were bused from our neighborhoods into Luther Jackson, but that wasn't a very long ride either. The difference is that as soon as they actually integrated, that school became majority white because it was in a white neighborhood. And a number of the teachers we had got transferred to Fairfax High. Okay. So we had highly qualified teachers that were obviously coveted by other campuses.
So you had white students and white teachers at Luther Jackson with you?
No.
You're talking about after.
That was after
okay.
they found. Yeah. So you mentioned that that Board v. Brown was in 54. Well, I graduated in 58 and they still had not desegregated the schools.
Right.
So Virginia wasn't that fast in getting it done. At least Fairfax, it wasn't that fast.
And Fairfax was behind Arlington, I think 61, 62, and Alexandria 62, 63. When did you first hear they're building Luther Jackson High School?
I don't know. I don't remember when they were building it.
Were you excited when you first heard there was going to be a high school close to you? And what grade were you in when you first in the fall of 54 when you first began to attend Luther Jackson?
I was in the 8th grade, ninth grade.
Okay.
Yeah, so 9th through 12th, I went through Luther Jackson. So I was among the first graduating class that went the entire time at Luther Jackson.
That's right.
Yeah.
So were you excited to be closer to home in a brand new school? Or would you have been happy to stay? Would you have been happy to stay in Manassas for school?
Oh no, I was pleased that it would be a much shorter day. That I would be in a new school that was close to home.
Yeah. Well, you talked about how vibrant Louise Archer and Manassas was. What about Luther Jackson? I've been through the yearbooks and I actually sent you some pictures, great pictures. It really brings the life of those days back. But did it have also a vibrant student life, great teachers like the other schools you went to?
Absolutely. Yeah, there were wonderful teachers there. And the program seemed to be quite complete in terms of there was the National Honor Society existed there. The Luther Jackson had a choir, had sports teams. One part of Luther Jackson had the only lower grade school for students with disabilities.
Mm.
That was something that none of the other schools in the county had. And so there were some innovative things being done there, and very accomplished teachers. So it was a wonderful place.
Mm. How about the student body? So you went from going to Manassas, and you had kids from all over the northern part of the state, to going to a school with mostly, I guess, Fairfax County residents. So what were the students like? And was it exciting being with a bunch of folks from the Northern Virginia area?
Well, I didn't pay any attention to where they were from.
Yeah.
I've noticed that what happened to some of the students since their graduation. I know that these are people that I was involved with in either the science club or the math club or something like that. There are people who left high school, went to college, they're engineers, now retired. A physics professor at a university in Texas was a Luther Jackson graduate. There, a number of the students there went on to professional schools of one kind or another and made great contributions as citizens. So I think their preparation and the fact that there were people who encouraged them, that was probably one of the best things, or the things missing now that a number of schools are integrated, to be truthful. They're not as often teachers who will inspire and help build the self-esteem and expectations of the students. But my teachers all did that.
Well, when I talked to Jim Lewis, Coach Lewis he integrated the Northern Virginia basketball leagues. He was the first Black basketball player to play for University of West Virginia University. And he was the first Black assistant coach at Duke. And he played at Parker Gray. And one thing he said, he was, I think, class of 62, 63, ended up going to Groveton at the end. But one thing he said is Luther Jackson was a country school to them. It was in the country. Do you remember those rivalries, the sporting rivalries between Parker Gray and Luther Jackson and Hoffman, Boston, I guess Pamunkey in Maryland, and maybe the schools in DC? Do you remember the sporting, the games?
No, I confess that I have not been a sports fan ever. So if I went to a basketball game, I didn't last long because the noise was too loud, and the cheering I found not comfortable to be in the middle of. So when I did watch a sport, I preferred to watch it on television so that I didn't have all the noise and energy around me. So I guess I'm not the person for your sports fans.
Did you know students at Parker Gray and Hoffman Boston and other schools? Did you know folks from those schools?
I knew Hoffman Boston students because we had participated in a science fair together. So again, my sphere of influence and the person that one of the people that I knew from Hoffman Boston, I invited to be my escort for a formal dance that was presented at my school, but by the AKAs. And it's interesting because then he married my sister.
Oh, is that right? Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, but in any case, they were the student, and he's an engineer, right? Or he's probably retired by now, but and went to Howard University. I remember that. But my sphere of influence throughout schooling years were mostly with people who were, I guess, now called the nerds, right? We were the math majors and the physics majors and chemistry people.
Yeah.
So that was a bit that limited how I interacted with all of those other schools. If you weren't in your science club and being in the the science fair, I probably wouldn't run into you.
Yeah, exactly. You're too smart for all those kids. So,
No,
so
just on a different plane, different experience.
yeah, exactly. Well, Luther Jackson was on Gallows Road on the western tip of Falls Church, almost in Fairfax. And nowadays, it's nestled under Tyson's Corner, an enormous office area and also, of course, shopping area. It's Merrifield is a shopping area as well. There's a place called the oh God, what's it called? The Mason District. I forgot it's a new shopping area there. But anyway, it's a highly developed area. What was it like in the late 50s?
Oh, it was definitely rural.
Mm.
Yeah, there was still farmland around. I don't remember, you had to go to Tyson's Corner, which was only which really was just a few stores. Now it's huge. And the last time I went to see something to visit at Luther Jackson was now a couple of decades ago. Even then, it wasn't quite as built up as it probably is now. So it stayed somewhat rural, or at least suburban, for quite a long time.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Aunt Manuelita. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your post Luther Jackson journey, Virginia State, going to Oregon State, meeting, since you loved your science professors, marrying a scientist, and settling in California and becoming a sculptor.
Yes, well, that journey was a little circuitous because I graduated as a math major still. I had taken a few art classes as electives for as many as they would let a non-major take in the department. I did that when I was in Oregon. But my then fiance, I guess you would call him, was a cadet in the ROTC.
Uncle Willie was in ROTC? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. He was in ROTC, very dashing in his Pershing rifles get up with white spats and gloves and, twirling the rifles and whatever. Hard to imagine him, huh?
I can't see Uncle Willie taking orders from anybody, but it's interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, when he graduated, he actually was given a regular Army commission.
Wow.
And so he was able to get a leave of absence to go to graduate school from the Army. So he was still in the Army, but on leave, and went to get a master's degree at Oregon State University. So when he graduated, we married and then moved to Oregon. So I transferred to my undergraduate work to Oregon and then completed my degree there. When he finished his master's degree, he had to actually go into active service and was stationed in the state of Washington at Fort Lewis. So there I began doing some work and decided to become a teacher as a result of that. When he resigned, I guess it is, from the Army, he went to get his PhD in Oregon. So I started teaching math there. And after finishing his PhD, he went to a postdoctoral fellow in La Jolla, California. And therefore we moved from Oregon to Southern California. And we've been here since then. The weather in Southern California is enticing. And one of the people that he had been working with was moving to take over the department in New York, upper state New York, and invited him to go with him. Well, the thought of leaving sunny Southern California and moving up to upstate New York was not at all appealing. So he ended up with a position as a professor at UC San Diego. Therefore, we never left this area once we came down here. And we've been here, but now 56 years. in Southern California. So he's now retired from the biology department. He's professor emeritus. And in the meantime, even though I was teaching math when I first moved to California, I started as the children aged and moved out of the house, and I started back doing some sculpting on just to play around with it, and decided that I still wanted to do that. So the last 25, 30 years I've been sculpting. And now that I retired completely from being a math educator. And that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Well, you do beautiful work. It's called Say Hi Studio.
Yes.
And people can find you online. My uncle Willie also is an amazing person. He was one of the most interesting people you'll ever meet. I believe one of the first non-humanities professor in the University of California school system. He's brother of my father, and you guys have built an incredible life together out in California. I just love visiting you guys. And one of your sons, you have two sons, and Vince is quite the historian. And my goal from this interview is to know as much about your history as Vince does. Vince is the African-American historian, but after I leave this interview, I hope to be able to tell Vince some things about his mother.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, Manuelita, this has been great catching up. You got a wonderful story, and you do great work. I would implore the listeners to check out your website. They can find the location of the website in the comment section below. But I really enjoyed talking about Luther Jackson High School, Manassas. It's amazing because it's great to hear such a positive spin about a very difficult time, a time when we were denied opportunities, but you found great educators and great education in Manassas and also at Luther Jackson.
Yes, that's true. The big part that's heartbreaking is that was true for only a few people. Mm. For the rest of the country, there were plenty of places where the schools were not heated, or the books were old, or the teachers were, well, for example, my mother had a high school education, but she taught a one-room school in Goshen, Virginia. Mm. Now, you can imagine a high school education from Stanton, Virginia, being a teacher for 7 grades in one room. Mm. And with no teaching experience, no teacher training, but she did the best she could do. Mm. And she only did that for a year or two. But the fact of the matter is, there's no way those children, even under the caring tutelage of my mother, could have had the same education that I was getting.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, there were too many of those schools with ill-prepared teachers and ill-equipped school buildings throughout the state and throughout the country. So I was very fortunate. I'm well aware of that I was very fortunate.
And you felt fortunate at the time as well. I mean, yeah, that's great.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, look, again, this has been great. I'm fortunate that you're my aunt and I get to hear these stories. So I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me. This is great. And obviously we could talk offline more, but I'm really glad you decided to come online and do this. This is great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Manuelita.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm helpless when I fall.